Hi there, I'm Matt Krieger. I'm a partner at Foley Lardner, and I want to welcome you to this evening's event. I want to thank the Federalist Society, the national organization, helped sponsor this event, and also our local Federalist Society chapter is obviously hosting tonight, and we're grateful for all the work they do to put this event together. Of course, I also want to thank our candidates who are taking time to be with us tonight and share their views. These, of course, are the candidates to serve as Wisconsin's 46th Attorney General. And they'll be vying for the primary election on August 9th. I'm going to just briefly introduce them because they'll have a chance tonight to introduce themselves to you more in full. First, here on my left is Adam Jarco from Clear Lake, Wisconsin, currently practicing law there, and he previously served for 2 terms as a representative in the Wisconsin Assembly. He received his JD from the University of Florida College of Law. In the middle is Karen Miller of Chippewa Falls. Ms. Miller practices law with the Amos Center for Justice and Liberty. She received her JD from the University of North Dakota School of Law. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And then finally, Eric Toney, who is the district attorney and of Fond du Lac County and has served in that role since 2013. He earned his JD from Hamline University School of Law. Now, of course, because this is an election to be the state's chief law enforcement official, laws matter, and so I want to briefly touch upon the rules for tonight, to which they have each agreed. We'll have opening statements for 3 minutes and closing statements of 2 minutes each. For the question format, I'll pose a question, and each of them will have an opportunity to answer it for 1 minute. If a candidate mentions another candidate by name in his response, then the named candidate will have 60 seconds for a response, and then a brief rebuttal by the naming candidate. The questions have not been shared in advance with the candidates or their campaigns. You can hold me fully responsible if you don't like them. They have agreed to abide by time limits, and they've agreed not to interrupt each other and to comport themselves with the professionalism, the dignity, the civility that is commensurate with the office they are seeking. So with that, why don't we jump right in, and we'll ask for opening statements first from Mr. Jarco.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the Federalist Society for hosting us. Since I'm the first to go, I'm just going to ask, how's the sound in the back? Is it okay? Sounds great. I'm in this race for only one reason, because Wisconsin and America are worth saving. We are in an epic battle with the left for the future of our state and the future of our country. And it is time that we elect people who will fight for our state and our country and the values on which our state and country are based. You will learn tonight that I am the only candidate up here with the depth and breadth of experience and judgment to be the next Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin. I am a lawyer in private practice, and I have done that for nearly 20 years. I've represented hundreds of small businesses and small business owners in hundreds or even thousands of matters over the course of my legal career. My wife and I are small business owners. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I use my time in my community to volunteer and do things like form the Polk County Canine Association, which we use our small businesses to raise money for the canine unit for Polk County, Wisconsin. You will learn that during the COVID shutdown, while others were going along with Tony Evers' illegal lockdowns, I was fighting back. I represented small business owners for free in the case that overturned those illegal orders. You will learn that I'm a dad first and a husband, and that in our community, what we strive for is to support and defend our law enforcement. And that's why I'm endorsed by nearly all of the law enforcement officials from my part of the state. In my time in the legislature, in just 4 short years, I was able to get nearly 100 bills that I voted for were signed into law by Governor Walker that supported our brave men and women in law enforcement. I was also a huge proponent of people's private property rights. In just one bill, we were able to overturn not only a Wisconsin Supreme Court opinion, but a United States Supreme Court opinion to protect people's private property rights. You will hear in this debate, I am sure, that people think, or at least some people think, that being a prosecutor is necessary for this job. And I'm here to tell you that maybe that was the case a time ago, but it is no longer the case. This is an agency of nearly 750 employees and a budget of over $100 million, and it has dozens of functions. And my depth and breadth of experience as a small businessman, a private practice lawyer, and a legislator are best suited to serve as Wisconsin's next Attorney General.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I appreciate your invitation to let us come and speak and to be a part of this forum. My reason for running is threefold, and I'm going to get right to it. The first reason is because I'm running to be a voice for those who have been who have died under suspicious circumstances in hospitals throughout the state of Wisconsin. The reason I know that is because as the founder and general counsel for Amos Center for Justice, I've taken many calls in the past 6 months from October on from families who have been very distraught because of the care that they have received, because of extreme federal government overreach that has led to what we call the COVID-19 protocol. And I do mean extreme federal government overreach in that they are the ones that are dictating the types of treatments, not the individual doctors when we are referring to COVID-19 patients. The second reason is because of the so-called vaccines. Now, some of you may be offended by that. Maybe some of you have received vaccines. But I'm here to tell you that people across this country have not received or given informed consent to these shots. And that is the second reason I'm running, is again to be a voice for the voiceless, for those who cannot speak for themselves. I have talked to doctors, I have talked to lawyers, and regular everyday citizens who are injured, and in some cases the families who are left behind because people died as a result of these shots. We have 28,000 confirmed deaths through VAERS, and I suspect that because that's undercounted by about 90%, the real total is somewhere over 200,000. The third reason I'm running is because of the election integrity. Within 90 or 30 days of the election, I filed the lawsuit Mueller v. Weck, which was the question put before the Supreme Court. This was an original action, and the question I asked was, as a matter of law, are the absentee ballot drop boxes legal? And we heard from Judge Boren in a second follow-up case, Tigan v. Weck, when he ruled that they are not only illegal, but the guidelines that Megan Wolf wrote were also illegal. And I will leave it at that. I know I'm about out of time. Thank you.
District Attorney Tony.
Well, I want to thank the Federalist Society and all of you for hosting this debate to get to know us as candidates better. And I got into this race for a really simple reason. I watched our Attorney General, who's our top cop, turn his back on our law enforcement in the wake of that Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, when our law enforcement had their backs against the wall like we've never seen before in probably most of our lifetimes. And that's personal for me. My dad spent over 30 years as a police officer. I know what it's like to worry about my dad's safety, and I know what it's like to not know if my dad's alive. And we need an attorney general that's going to stand with our law enforcement as well as stand with all of us, because we've all earned that right. And the sad reality is we have an attorney general that's effectively a liberal activist that will not enforce the rule of law unless he agrees with it. We've seen that time after time, or he won't even make a decision because he's afraid of what the outcome would be. For some of you, you might be familiar with Marcy's Law. And he was almost nowhere to be found as law enforcement and prosecutors struggled. He was almost nowhere to be found during COVID. He tried to remove a DNR board member, and even a Dane County judge said he was wrong on the law, and he's outright said he won't enforce Roe versus Wade if it's overturned because he disagrees. We need an attorney general that will enforce the rule of law, not just when it's politically popular. That's what I've done in my nearly 10 years as a district attorney in Fond du Lac County. And when COVID hit, we filed a small number of cases from the first 13 days when even President Trump supported those efforts, but we never convicted anybody of anything, never shut down a business or a church. On top of that, when the illegal extended order came out in April of 20, we never enforced it. But I didn't stop there. On April 19th of 2020, I started a task force called Reopen Fond du Lac to give our businesses the tools and resources they needed to stay open or reopen. And then in August, when that mask mandate came out, I analyzed the law and said the governor overstepped his legal authority and we will not enforce it. And I sent a letter on August 3rd to my local officials letting them know, where I have the credibility and the record as a DA that has managed an office, managed a budget, and interacted with nearly every aspect of our Attorney General's office, with our DCI, our crime lab, the Office of Training and Standards, the prosecutors, the criminal appeals. We need an Attorney General, a prosecutor, not a politician, that has used these resources as we see historic violence and drugs. We do not have time for on-the-job training.
Okay, thank you to each of the candidates. For the first set of questions, we're going to be talking about issues of public safety and law enforcement. I'm going to ask questions rotating first with Mr. Jarco, and then the second question I'll ask first to Ms. Miller. So first question to you is to address violent crime in Wisconsin. Homicides in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee in particular, have increased substantially in recent years. According to the Wisconsin Department of Justice, there were 315 homicides in 2021, which is up 70% from 2019. And Milwaukee alone had over 200 homicides last year, nearly double 2019. So the question is, what would you do as Attorney General to address violent crime? And if you could, in your answer, address in particular how you'd work with county DAs that have a lot of the responsibility to prosecute crimes.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So first and foremost, this question gets right to the heart of one of the biggest problems that we have in Wisconsin today, is we have a cancer in our criminal justice system. We have too many prosecutors, and it's not just here in Milwaukee County, it's all across the state, who refuse to do their job or fail to do their job, and we continue to see criminals put back out on the street. So first and foremost, the Attorney General has to use the bully pulpit to force these district attorneys to bring transparency and accountability to the counties to make sure that they're actually putting criminals behind bars. We also put out a plan that we call the Make Wisconsin Safe Again plan. It would address crime here in Milwaukee, it would address gun crime, it would address issues in our schools, and most importantly, it would fully fund our law enforcement. It is time that we have an Attorney General who stands foursquare with our law enforcement and backs the badge. And having been through budget processes, I can guarantee you I'm the best suited to make sure we fully fund our law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Miller.
Thank you for the question. I recently was downtown inner city Milwaukee, where a lot of poor families live, and they live in public housing, and there's a lot of violent crime. In fact, the day before I was down there, there had been 17 shootings. One thing that I did not know, maybe I should have known, but I learned, was that there is no Second Amendment rights in the inner cities. That if you live in public housing, you have no right to defend yourself with a weapon, with a gun. And I would certainly work to change that. I think I would work with other attorney generals if possible, because this is an issue we have to address at the federal level, where we have the federal government again in vast overreach, telling certain people they don't have a right to defend themselves. Thank you.
DA Tony.
So last fall, I put out a proposal in October. We need to give our Attorney General original prosecution authority over Milwaukee County to take on the cases that the DA's office is unable or unwilling to prosecute here in Milwaukee County, because I can tell you, as a DA that's actually prosecuted violent criminals and locked up murderers, rapists, complex drug conspiracies, that violent crime in Milwaukee bleeds across Wisconsin, and we need to gain control of Milwaukee to protect the rest of our state. We also need to reform cash bail, and I proposed a bill to define what it actually means to be likely to appear in court, to force our judges to consider these things, to hold these dangerous criminals in custody instead of them continuing to commit new crimes. And we need an attorney general that will restock the criminal litigation unit and decentralize that unit across Wisconsin to better assist our DAs throughout this state to take on this violent crime and work with our legislature to continue to add more prosecutors to our Department of Justice.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I want to continue on that issue of bail reform. As I'm sure everybody remembers, last November, Darrell Brooks drove a car through the Waukesha Christmas parade, killing 6. He was out on bail from Milwaukee County, leading to a lot of discussion about bail reform. So the question first to you, Ms. Miller, is do you believe there should be any changes to Wisconsin's pretrial detention system? If so, what would you do as Attorney General, particularly given that that would require a change to state law through the legislature?
Thank you. There has to be a change, because what we saw was a symptom of a broken system. We have to be able to make sure that violent offenders are not preying on society. And when they have indicated, as this man did, that he was already prepared to use a vehicle to harm somebody, then we most certainly can use our common sense and say this person needs to be kept away from society even until the trial. And so certainly the bully pulpit in that situation is something that I would work with our state representatives to be able to make sure that we can come to a set of laws that will protect society and will protect the accused due process rights.
DA Tony.
I've actually been working on this issue with our Wisconsin DAs Association for years. We supported the constitutional amendment in, I think it was 2017, under then Attorney General Schimmel, that would have changed the Wisconsin Constitution to consider the dangerousness of criminals, and our current Attorney General has not supported that. But I've also proposed bills to our legislature to address this now. 2 of those things. One, as I mentioned, is that we need to define what it means to be likely to appear in court. Because I make these arguments all the time. There are prosecutors in this room that make these arguments all the time, but some liberal judges will not consider the defendant where there are open cases, nature of the crime, potential penalties. We can force the judges to consider these things now, and also improve our statute that allows us to hold someone with no bail, because it's not workable now for DAs to use it because of the hearings and essentially a speedy trial track that it puts, and we can improve that statute to allow prosecutors to actually be able to use that to keep our community safe. And I've been working on this with our legislature for, frankly, years.
Thank you. Mr. Jarco.
So the simple answer is yes, and I've already voted in favor of it. When I was in the legislature, we looked ahead and saw these issues coming up, and in the state assembly, we passed that constitutional amendment to be able to reform bail. So that needs to not only get passed and then voted on by the public, but then we need a legislature that will make these changes and a governor that will sign them into law. But these changes on their own do us no good if we have prosecutors that won't make appropriate bail recommendations, and if we have judges that continue to allow allow criminals out on low or no bail. So we have to have serious conversations about serious reform there and seriously consider minimum bail for some of these crimes, because we are having major problems all across the state, not only on bail but on these plea deals. So yes, we need reform, but we also need to go one step further and have mandatory minimums on it.
Okay, thank you. Next question for DA Tony. We're talking about violent crime. Obviously, a lot of these involve shootings. Some of it is rival gangs, but some of it has been shootings like the incidents in Buffalo, New York, or Uvalde, Texas, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Closer to home, near the Deer District, during the playoffs, we saw a shooting incident that left over 20 injured. So, question for you as Attorney General. Do you think there's a role for the Attorney General to be and address mass shooting incidents? And what would you think about any need for changes on the gun laws in Wisconsin, given the Second Amendment, but also given these mass shootings?
Yeah, I've prosecuted, I don't know how many, the last 2 attempted homicide jury trials I did, they were both felons. They had a gun. There was no law that stopped them from possessing that firearm. There's a law against shooting people or murder, and we're not seeing those laws stop people. And routinely, we see efforts to push different laws that aren't going to actually have a meaningful effect on curbing these types of mass shootings, and all it does is restrict our Second Amendment rights. And so we must hold the line in protecting our Second Amendment, because once you start chipping away on one, you start chipping away on all of them. And so we must defend the Second Amendment. We have a mental health statute on the books right now if somebody's a danger to themselves or others, where law enforcement can intervene, and we're not seeing that used because mental health, frankly, isn't funded enough here in Wisconsin. And so we need to make sure that we're holding those people accountable that are committing crimes with firearms, to make sure that people do not want to do that, and that includes mandatory minimums for those violent criminals that will use a weapon, a firearm, to commit a crime.
Representative Jarco.
So certainly, and part of our Make Wisconsin Safe Again plan was to go after the criminals and the thugs who are using guns in these crimes. So I believe that the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin should have some additional authority in our largest cities to take on this particular issue when felons are using guns in violent crimes, because we see in some counties the prosecutor simply refuses to do their job, right? But we see in other counties that they just need some additional help and resources. So there is no reason that the Department of Justice should not have the authority to step in the largest cities in our state where we have violent criminals, violent felons, who are repeat criminals using guns in crimes. We should have an AG who's willing and able to take those steps, and is willing and able to step in a place like Milwaukee where maybe the DA doesn't want them to, or step into another city where the DA simply needs some help.
Ms. Miller.
You brought up the issue of the school shooting, the recent one, and I would like to say from that perspective, this was a young man who just turned 18, and my understanding was he was confused, and he was very angry because he hadn't graduated. At least that's what the news reports were talking about. Obviously, he was able to get a gun, and I'm not going to go against gun ownership at 18 when we send people that age to fight for our country. Having said that, we have a real problem in Wisconsin with failing children, especially among the poorer populations, with mental health needs, and with just failing them in any number of ways, with confusing messages that have no place in our schools. And I think that we need to change that.
Okay, thank you. Question for Representative Jarco. I want to turn to drug trafficking, as we're still on the topic of public safety. We are still in the throes of the opioid epidemic. Drug overdoses in Milwaukee County alone reached over 600 last year, and about 1,500 Wisconsinites died of overdose deaths in 2020. So what, as Attorney General, would you do to be addressing the ongoing crisis of drug abuse and overdose deaths?
Yeah, we've been fighting this fight for a long time, and it's time to get serious about it. When I was in the legislature, we passed dozens of bills in the HOPE agenda that Representative Nygren had put forward. But what we're seeing today is far worse than what we could have imagined, and it's fentanyl, and that is streaming across our southern border. I had an opportunity to visit the southern border recently with 2 Wisconsin sheriffs and Congressman Tiffany to see exactly what was going on, and it is horrific and nightmarish. It is time to get serious about securing our border. And if we would get serious about securing our border and have an attorney general who will actually hold the Biden administration accountable for failing and refusing to uphold our border laws, then we could stop the fentanyl from flowing into our communities. Every single law enforcement officer that I've talked about tells me that fentanyl, meth, opioids, they're all streaming across the border, and it is time we get serious about fixing that issue, and I will be a fierce advocate for securing our southern border and stopping the flow of this poison into our communities.
Ms. Miller.
I absolutely agree that we need to secure our borders. This is outrageous that we are having illegal aliens coming into our country, and they're coming in with drugs, and they are harming people of all ages, particularly our youth. But having said that, we are discussing drugs such as opioids and fentanyl. And my perspective, just with my experience in the last 6 months, is that we've also got a crisis in our hospitals because we have taken away the ability of doctors to be able to make decisions, and instead they are being made by the federal government. Again, this is a serious problem that is not being addressed. It is not being addressed in the media, and it is taking away the lives of people who went to hospitals for help, and instead they end up dead. And we need to address that right along with the opioid crisis on our streets. Thank you.
Thank you. D.A. Tony, how would you address the drug epidemic?
Well, I can tell you, I've sat across from too many parents that have had to bury their child from a drug death, and you hear the heart-wrenching stories where no parent should have to bury their child. And we've developed, and I've developed, a tough-on-crime record in Fond du Lac County where we build complex drug conspiracy cases where we will charge 2 or 3 people deep in drug overdose deaths. And I also started an opioid coalition in Fond du Lac County years ago to help tackle this issue in Fond du Lac County. Our Attorney General is in charge of the training for prosecutors across Wisconsin, and we need to make sure that we're training our prosecutors on how to build these complex conspiracies where we can build historical data on deliveries and put serious felony cases in front of our courtrooms. But we also have to continue to look at the treatment option, because even when you talk with our law enforcement, we're never going to simply arrest our way out of this issue. We have to also look at drug courts, and drug testing is a significant component of that. And the sad reality is when we see people on probation, there's not enough resources to effectively monitor them.
Okay, thank you. One more question in this subject of public safety. Ms. Miller, starting with you, let's talk marijuana. 2 surrounding states, Michigan and Illinois, have legalized marijuana, and certain individual municipalities, including Madison, have effectively legalized low-level possession. But of course, marijuana distribution, possession is still illegal under state law and federal law. So as candidate for Attorney General, where in the list of priorities would you put your enforcement resources when it comes to cases that just involve marijuana?
Sadly, we do have to prioritize, and I think that I would not have as high a priority as for enforcement of marijuana. It doesn't mean that it isn't important, but it means that the resources that the Attorney General's office has are very limited, and we are talking about various or I should say severe violent crime. We are looking at serious crime related to the drugs, and then we are also looking at the potential to have to investigate and look into prosecution of crimes that are taking place at the statewide level, and I think that I would have to make a very low priority at this point.
Okay, thank you. DA Tony.
When I mentioned one of those attempted homicide trials that I had done with a shooting, that was partly marijuana related. And we see marijuana, to the surprise of many, actually drive violent crime in some of our communities because the money that goes along with it. And so we focus and we prosecute people for delivering marijuana, possessing it. We certainly look at our resolutions differently on those types of cases based on the quantity, the prior record, but we also have drug driving, which is increasing with marijuana. And those folks are dangerous on our roadways. I mean, we're sitting here in the city of Milwaukee, and you know the challenges and dangers that we already face with people that are driving sober. And then when you throw drugs on top of that, it's even more dangerous. And there's a reason law enforcement does not support legalizing marijuana. And I'm proud to be law enforcement's choice in this race, endorsed by 45 of our 72 sheriffs and over 100 of our sheriffs, DAs, and police chiefs across Wisconsin that know we need an experienced prosecutor to clean up this mess that Josh Call has created for us.
Thank you, Representative Jarco.
So the important part of this job is that you have to uphold and enforce whatever the law is. I served in the legislature, and that is the time and the place to make laws. The time and place to enforce laws is when you're in the executive branch. So the job of the Attorney General will be to enforce whatever the law happens to be. When I was in the legislature, I proposed a bill, along with a number of other Republicans, that would have lowered the penalty on the possession of a small amount of marijuana from a misdemeanor to an ordinance violation. We did that in part because we see that's what's happening, or saw that's what was happening with lots of counties and county DAs around the state. But as Attorney General, the job is to uphold and enforce the law. You may know that the legislature right now is considering a medical marijuana law. If they pass that, the job of the Attorney General is to uphold and enforce that law. If they leave the law the way it is, it's to uphold and enforce that law. And that is my commitment, is to uphold and enforce the law, whatever the legislature chooses that it should be.
Okay, thank you. We're going to turn to another sort of broad set of questions about the Attorney General's office, the structure and operations of it. So starting with DA Tony, I want to ask you about a Solicitor General's role. As you probably know, the Wisconsin Department of Justice had a separately funded Solicitor General's office that was fairly active in litigating not only appellate issues in the state of Wisconsin, but also national issues. After the 2018 elections, that office was removed. So I'm going to give myself the liberty of a compound question. The question is, would you create another Solicitor General's office? And what's your view for what it would do, in particular, to what extent it should participate in litigating national issues?
Well, number one, our Attorney General's office is largely statutory driven, and so when we want to do something, we need to work with the legislature for funding. So number one, I would absolutely work with our legislature to get funding to reestablish our Solicitor General's office here in Wisconsin. We saw that under AG Brad Schimmel and some of the successes that they had. And what we need to make sure that office would be focusing on would be some of those complex constitutional issues, federal overreach from whether it's our federal government or here in Wisconsin, to make sure that we have experienced attorneys that can tackle those complex issues to protect our individual rights here in Wisconsin. But we need to make sure we are partnering with our legislature to do that, and then ensuring that we're able to hire some great attorneys like we've had before to tackle that.
Representative Jarco.
Absolutely, we should reestablish the SG's office. I voted for it when I was in the legislature. I was a huge proponent of it. It was hugely successful. After I left the legislature and former Solicitor General Seitlin went into private practice, I've had the privilege of being involved in a couple of cases with him. I helped with the capacity restrictions case during when Evers tried to impose capacity restrictions on bars and restaurants in the state. I'm also litigating with former SG Seitlin right now the case against Josh Call because he refuses to follow one of the so-called lame duck laws. He was a tremendous success and successful SG. He is the model that we ought to follow in Wisconsin, and certainly the model that I would follow. Although I will say that one of the bills that overturned the U.S. Supreme Court decision on the Murr case, Misha argued, and I prod him all the time that he did a great job winning that case, and I was proud to overturn his horrible precedent.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Miller.
I would most certainly be in favor of restoring the Solicitor General office. With the level of federal government overreach that we have in the last few years, especially in the last 2 years, I don't think that we in Wisconsin can afford not to. We have an out-of-control federal government that is now in the process of, in my opinion, giving away the sovereignty of the United States. Once we get to that point. And what I mean about that is our president traveling to Switzerland and then deciding that they are going to make the World Health Organization in charge of the mandates. I can tell you that if I become the Attorney General, that will not happen. And the reason it will not happen is because if they give away the sovereignty of the United States, then it is going to be the sovereign state of Wisconsin that stands, and the Attorney General that will stand between the people and these unconstitutional mandates.
Okay. Thank you. DA Tony.
I think I already answered that one.
Of course you did.
But
It was
I'll
a
take
test.
another minute if you want to give it to me.
It was a test. He's still awake, so this is good. Okay, a question for Representative Jarco. I want to hear more about priorities. As you mentioned, the Wisconsin Department of Justice has broad litigating authority but finite resources. I'm going to tick off just some of the areas that it does have statutory authority to cover. That includes consumer protection and antitrust law, environmental laws, Medicaid fraud and elder abuse, of course, criminal prosecutions, human trafficking, child exploitation. What would be your top 3 priorities for DOJ's litigating units, and what plans would you have to pursue those priorities?
So first and foremost, we have, because of President Trump's nominees to the Supreme Court, a generational opportunity to litigate incredibly important transformational cases in front of that court. So we ought to be looking for every opportunity to right-size the balance of power between the federal and state government, to rein in out-of-control bureaucracy, and to ensure separation of powers, and meaning that we don't have executive orders ruling the day. We don't have illegal orders and rules ruining people's lives without ever having seen the light of day in the houses of Congress or in the legislature. So that would be number 1. Number 2, we should do the same thing here in Wisconsin. We have an out-of-control bureaucracy that ruins people's lives, and we ought to be ensuring, as the Attorney General, that the agencies are actually following the law. And third, and this isn't a litigating priority, but we have to fix what's been broken. We have to restore DCI and the prosecutors that Josh Kaul has cut from DOJ.
Okay, Ms. Miller, your litigating priorities.
First of all, I would look into the vaccine issue, again, because it is such a high priority. When in the history of this country has it been all right for the federal government to be experimenting upon the citizens of Wisconsin and the rest of this country? Not since Nazi Germany have we seen the level of human experimentation that has been going on in this country, and that needs to stop, and that needs to be a priority. Secondly, that's related to elder abuse, and it's also going to be related very soon, if we don't stop this, to child abuse when we start giving shots to these young children. Thirdly, we have a crisis of human trafficking, and if I'm elected Attorney General, I will work to open a task force for human trafficking in this state, specifically regarding children.
Okay, thank you. DA Tony.
Our Attorney General is called the top cop for a reason, because the overwhelming majority of that office deals with law enforcement, and that would absolutely be my number 1 mission. And we've seen the consequences when it's not. And Josh Kaul is the example. As we see unprecedented violence and drugs, he has defunded DCI law enforcement, he's defunded prosecutors, and he has mismanaged our crime lab beyond belief, where he's actually taking in less items testing less items and taking longer to do it in most categories compared to Brad Schimmel when he was our Attorney General, and we need to right the ship there to keep Wisconsin safe. We also need to make sure that we're prioritizing any of the federal or state overreach that we're seeing in those constitutional issues to protect the rule of law and our freedoms. But we've also seen social media and tech companies run wild, where we need an Attorney General that is willing to stand up to them as we see what has happened across our country over the past few years.
Okay. Next question, we're going to start with Ms. Miller. And to dive a little bit deeper on the question of how, as Attorney General, you would interact with the administrative agencies, which are principally under the control of Governor Evers. And so I want to give a hypothetical to you. Let's say you have a situation where the current Department of Justice, under the current Attorney General, is litigating for an agency on an enforcement claim where the state's statutory authority is questionable, where the state's statutory authority is maybe close to being over the edge of the statutory grant of authority. And then you, let's say, get elected as Attorney General and come in. How would you approach those existing litigating positions for agencies and future ones if an agency comes to you wanting to bring an enforcement action that's aggressive?
Well, obviously, we have to look at the facts, but when we're dealing with the agency, the Attorney General is ultimately responsible for making statements regarding what is constitutional, what is unconstitutional, and if it's going to be very aggressive in a way that is going to go against the principles of freedom and go against people in the state where their constitutional rights are coming close to being violated, then I would certainly advise them that this would be something where we need to work together to, with a common goal, to find a solution, perhaps as an alternative to litigation. So.
Okay. And I realize my question was complicated, thank you, so I'll repeat it in summary fashion. Let's say you become AG for existing.
I got it.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay, he's got it.
So number one, when I got elected DA, I had to evaluate cases that weren't filed or were filed, and I'll do the same thing as Attorney General to see what cases do we need to pull out of, what cases might we need to initiate, but I'm going to follow the rule of law. That's what we expect our Attorney General to do, and sometimes that means we disagree with the rule of law. When that happens, I'm going to work with our legislature to try and change the law. One thing all of us know, our business community, farming community, they need certainty so they can plan for the future if they're going to invest money in our state. We've seen the farming community investing millions of dollars out of Wisconsin because they don't have that certainty, because they're afraid the rug is going to get pulled out from under them. And we need an Attorney General that will follow the rule of law and make sure that our state has certainty, that they trust that the law will be followed. And when it doesn't, we work with our legislature, because they're the lawmaking body, and that's where it belongs, not with our courts and not with our Attorney General.
Okay, thank you. Representative Jarco.
We have all had a front row seat to bureaucratic overreach over the last 2 years, and the most egregious cases are obviously the COVID cases. The Department of Health believing it had the authority to lock us in our house, shut down our businesses, and shut down our churches. As Attorney General, we can never, ever stand for that again, and I never would as Attorney General. We've seen the bureaucracy over and over again try to ignore the law. We have right now the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty litigating a case because DNR is making up out of whole cloth some rule related to PFAS that it has no authority to enforce. We saw recently one of the bills that I co-authored was the REINS Act. We saw the DPI said, well, I don't think the REINS Act applies to me. This is the bureaucracy that we have. This is the mindset of bureaucrats, and we need an Attorney General who will forcefully push back and fight back against that kind of bureaucratic overreach that we see time and time again.
Okay, thank you. With our remaining time, we're going to turn to questions of civil liberties. For DA Toney, a question about abortion. The leaked Dobbs opinion indicates the Supreme Court may soon overturn Roe and Casey. As everybody knows, there's also an existing law on the books in Wisconsin It does not have exceptions for the health of the mother, for rape, for incest. How would you approach enforcement of that existing law, including its absence of exceptions?
So as a district attorney, we would be the ones in charge of enforcing that abortion ban if Roe is overturned, and I've committed that as a DA, I will enforce that ban if Roe is overturned, and as your Attorney General, I will enforce that ban on the books here in Wisconsin. I'm proud to be endorsed by Wisconsin Right to Life and to be pro-life, but the job of the Attorney General, I mean, I get attacked by the left time after time because I have the audacity to say, I'm going to enforce the rule of law, and that includes the abortion ban on the books here in Wisconsin, because Josh Kaul said he won't do it because he disagrees with the law. And that means he's not fit to be Attorney General if he's going to pick and choose which laws he's going to follow and which laws he is not going to follow. And that's what my track record is as a DA. I've got nearly a decade-long track record of enforcing the rule of law. I actually get attacked by some on the right for enforcing the rule of law. So you know exactly what I will do as your Attorney General, and that's enforce the rule of law, including the abortion ban if allowed.
Representative Jarco.
Yeah, I've said it before in this debate, the job of the Attorney General is to enforce the law. If Dobbs overturns Roe and Casey, the law that is on our books in Wisconsin will come into effect, and the job of the Attorney General is to enforce that law. It is critically important that we have a rule of law and that we have respect for the rule of law. And what Josh Kaul has said is totally disrespectful to the rule of law. If the people of the state of Wisconsin decide that they want to change that law, they can work with their legislators to change that law. And keep in mind that the Democrats have had over 100 years that they could have changed this law. They had full control of both houses of the legislature and the governor in 2009. Did they change the law? No. So what you're hearing today is a bunch of nonsense, and it's a bunch of political nonsense. It is time to have an Attorney General who is committed to upholding and enforcing the rule of law, and that includes our state's laws related to abortion if and when the Dobbs case is decided.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Miller.
I've been endorsed by Pro-Life Wisconsin, and that means I'm 100% pro-life from conception to natural death. And having said that, Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, and we have had many millions of deaths, and we would be into a second or third generation. Having said that, we haven't had violence, we haven't had rioting because of that, because we here in Wisconsin believe in the rule of law, and so we accept the decisions that have come from our court. And having said that, so obviously that has been the way it has been for almost 50 years, and if this decision is overturned, then it makes perfect sense that we will enforce completely the new rule.
Okay, thank you. Representative Jarco, I want to ask a question about individuals who have been convicted of felonies, have served their sentences, and are then trying to re-enter society, where under law there are certain civil liberties that are no longer available to them, and as we want people to re-enter successfully, it can be difficult. As Attorney General, do you have views on what rights should or should not be afforded to re-entering individuals, and any plans to support re-entry?
Yeah, we should be looking carefully at this and working with the legislature on this issue. There's a couple of areas that I think could be incredibly important to work on, but we have to be very careful. Keep in mind, we're dealing with people who are convicted felons, and you lose certain rights when you violate that social contract. And we have to be very careful about restoring those rights, because we continue to see criminals that are habitually repeating. So before we are restoring any of these rights, we have to ensure that they're not going to repeat. But if we have those assurances and we can craft something narrow, one, we are in a workforce shortage. We should try to make it easier for people to re-enter the workforce. Two, I hear from people that have committed nonviolent felonies long, long, long ago and have been great citizens ever since then that would love to go hunting with their grandson. Is there a narrow way that we can restore some Second Amendment rights to folks without giving career criminals gun rights? Maybe, and those are things I hope the legislature will look at.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, your thoughts on reentry?
I pretty much agree. In working with the legislature, we have to be able to find a way to look at, in particular, nonviolent felons and a way to restore rights. We have to, I think, really, as an attorney general, it makes sense in a role where you're making the policy, where you are, and where you do have a bully pulpit, that we begin to look at bringing people back in to the fold of having their societal rights completely restored. Having said that, where you're talking about violent past crimes, I am not in favor of that.
Okay, thank you. DA Tony.
So I've had the unique perspective of not just a prosecutor, but I spent about 2.5 years making my police officer dad, who's in fact proud, doing criminal defense work. So I've actually sat across from clients and had these in-depth conversations with them. And people make a choice when they commit a crime. It's very rare that somebody says, oh, gee, I didn't know that I was committing a crime. Now, that does happen sometimes, but it's very rare. And we see when people are convicted of a felony, once they complete that sentence, they are able to get their voting rights back. The biggest issue I've seen as a DA where somebody maybe has gone 20 or 30 years without committing a crime and they had maybe a low-level felony as a young person and they want to be able to hunt again. And there are ways that we should look at that for people that have otherwise lived an exemplary lifestyle. But we need to have a deterrent so that people are not committing these crimes to protect the safety of our communities.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Ms. Miller to begin. Please explain your view of the Attorney General's role to ensure election integrity in Wisconsin.
I think the Attorney General has a major role in looking at the election integrity. In the past 2 years, we have seen many different versions of what happened come out regarding the 2020 election. I was in on the ground floor of it when I filed the lawsuit Mueller v. Weck regarding the absentee ballot drop boxes. And in that particular case, I took that up to the Supreme Court, and they did refuse to hear it. But it would have been very helpful in the past year and a half if we would have had an Attorney General looking into this situation and, again, working with the legislature and advising them on what the law is, the plain meaning of the statute. Just looking at that, you can tell that the boxes were illegal and that they remain illegal. And that would have been helpful to have Josh Call weighing in on that.
Thank you. DA Tony.
We know elections are the cornerstone of our democracy, and we need to make sure that every ballot is treated and counted the same, no matter which county it's cast. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that, and a big problem has been the Wisconsin Election Commission, where they're giving out guidance or directives going beyond their statutory authority, and that's why I filed efforts to try and remove those board members that broke our election laws here in Wisconsin. I'm also prosecuting more election fraud than anybody else in Wisconsin, and I've also pushed out a statute before our spring election, 5.07 if you're an election nerd, because that gives DAs and our Attorney General that original jurisdiction to file an injunction or mandamus action to actually intervene in our elections before ballots are counted to protect the integrity of that process, because we've seen lawsuits thrown out because someone didn't have standing or latches and they filed it too late. DAs and our Attorney General actually have the statutory authority to intervene, and I've done everything within my power as a DA to protect the integrity of our elections, and I will do the same thing as your Attorney General.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Jarco.
I think the short answer is to do basically the opposite of what Josh Call has done. He has a number of investigations sitting on his desk that he could get involved in. Sheriff Schmaling's investigation of the nursing home voting issues. Josh Call hasn't lifted a finger. Instead of trying to help the Gableman investigation along, what has Attorney General Call done? He's tried to stand in the way of that investigation. And that is a serious problem. We should have an attorney general that is committed to upholding and defending our election laws and election integrity. It is the foundation of our entire republic. And without an attorney general that will actually investigate and work with the legislature to ensure that they can prosecute people that break election laws, we will continue to see this one election after the next. The Democrats will say the election was stolen, and the Republicans will say the election was stolen. We saw Hillary Clinton say the election was stolen in 2016. It is time that we have an attorney general who will uphold and enforce our election laws and investigate when appropriate.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do one more question before closing statements. I'm going to put it under the category of independence. First to DA Toney. Again, this position is the state's chief prosecutor. And Justice Robert Jackson gave a famous speech saying the following about a prosecutor. The prosecutor has more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America. While the prosecutor at his best is one of the most beneficent forces in our society, when he acts from malice, he is one of the worst. There is a most important reason why the prosecutor should have, as nearly as possible, a detached and impartial view of all groups in his community. So the question is, given that you're running in a partisan election in a time of deep division among Wisconsinites, how would you maintain the trust of all Wisconsinites, even those who don't vote for you?
That's what I've done as a DA. I got elected with bipartisan support in 2012 as a Republican, defeating our incumbent Republican DA based on some ethics issues and crime issues that I was seeing. And as a candidate for Attorney General, I have bipartisan support from sheriffs and district attorneys across Wisconsin that have seen the failures of Josh Call and know we need a prosecutor and not a politician to clean up the mess that he's created, because that's the record that will help us win in November. Because we've seen before, the Attorney General does not always go with the top of the ticket. 2006 was a blue wave across Wisconsin and the United States, and J.B. Van Holland, the prosecutor, beat Kathleen Falk, the Democrat with no prosecution experience. We saw Jim Doyle as a Democrat Attorney General under Tommy Thompson for, I think it was 2 terms. We cannot afford to make the same mistake that Democrats have made. I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually prosecuted a case, and that's what voters expect when they're electing our top cop in November, and I've built that bipartisan support.
Thank you. Representative Jarco.
And not only have I talked about independence, but I've walked the walk. I was one of the only Republicans in the legislature to vote against Foxconn. And I will tell you, standing up to a president of your own party and a governor of your own party on an issue of that magnitude is not easy. But standing for principle is always the right thing to do, no matter whether it's easy or hard. And I would absolutely bring that to the job of Attorney General. If we're blessed to have a Republican governor, I would imagine, because I saw this under other Republican governors, that we will still have bureaucrats and agencies that are somewhat out of control. And as Attorney General, I will do exactly what I have said tonight that I will do, and I will push back hard on them. And I assume that, maybe somebody as a Republican governor wouldn't like that, maybe wouldn't like some of the media coverage, but these are seminal, important issues that we have to address. We have to get a handle on out-of-control bureaucracy, and the only way to do that is with an independent Attorney General.
Thank you. Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I have proved that I have acted repeatedly on independent principles when we are talking about the election integrity. As I said earlier, I filed the case Mueller v. Weck, and throughout the past year and a half, I have, through Amos Center for Justice, the public interest law firm that I formed, have been working on this issue, investigating it, and I have called out people on both sides of the aisle and continue to do that, and am currently working on a case that will bring some justice to this area in the state of Wisconsin, and that involves both Republicans and Democrats.
Okay, thank you for your helpful questions, helpful answers to questions. We're going to turn to closing statements. 2 minutes are allotted. We'll begin in reverse order with DA Toney.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all of your attention and for being here today. You finally got to hear us without our talking points on the stump for some of you that have gotten out there. But I've hit 60 counties so far, and my plan is to hit all 72 before the election. And I'm battle tested. I have been attacked relentlessly by our own party since I got into this race. I have had people, for doing my job, threaten to cut my head off, shave my eyebrows, and mail my head to the media. And I don't know what they had against my eyebrows, but I've also had people threaten to shoot me and blow up my courthouse. And I have never backed down in standing up for my community and for protection. And I will never back down as your Attorney General in standing up for you and keeping our community safe, protecting our liberties, and protecting our freedoms, because that's what my track record is as a district attorney. No matter how much other people want to tell you or suggest otherwise, I've stood up for you, I've stood up against overreach, and I will do that as your Attorney General, because that's my track record, and I'm proud to be law enforcement's choice in this race for Attorney General, to be our top cop, because the Attorney General is responsible for giving out guidance to our law enforcement and prosecutors. And when your family is the victim of a sexual assault or a violent crime, who do you want making those policies at our Department of Justice? Because we need somebody that has gone through these issues before and isn't learning on the job, because as we see historic violence and drugs, we don't have time for on-the-job training. And a tough-on-crime record that I've developed as a DA is why I have this law enforcement support. And I would be honored to be your Attorney General. I never thought I'd be in this race, but I've watched Josh Call fail time after time, and we cannot afford another 4 years of his failures. And frankly, it's why we need a prosecutor and not a politician. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you for coming tonight and for giving us this opportunity to speak with you. I see the Attorney General's role as primarily being one of protecting the civil and constitutional rights of the citizens of Wisconsin. When you are in the position of Attorney General, you are also making decisions regarding prosecution, but you are also making decisions regarding the civil liberties of the people that live in this state. And when we have the unprecedented overreach that we have at this time with the federal government and the mandates that have come out through our state government, then we are going to that has to be the priority, because if we can't live free, there is going to be nothing else. Our grandchildren will live as slaves. It is important at this time in our history that that is the priority, is protecting the civil rights and the constitutional rights of every citizen. And in the case where I talked about in the hospital and with the vaccines, we are talking about the very life of people, that these decisions are being made at the governmental level, and this is outrageous and it needs to stop. We have also put our law enforcement people in an untenable situation of trying to figure out whether they are supposed to enforce the mandates or not. As the wife of a 28-year law enforcement officer and the mother of a 20-year Marine who was in law enforcement, I'm very much aware of what that does to law enforcement when they have no idea and do not believe that the people that are supposed to be making the policy are going to stand behind them. And as your next Attorney General, I would make sure that that happens, that they know exactly where they need to, what rules they need to enforce and not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the final word, Representative Jarco.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Federalist Society. Thank you, Matt, for great questions. As you guys could see from Matt's questions and the broad and diverse array of questions that he asked, this is a job that has dozens and dozens of different functions. It is an agency that has 750 or so employees. It has a budget of well over $100 million. And I am the only candidate that has the deep and broad experience necessary to carry out all of the functions of the job on day one. Immediately after the election, we will go into budget season. And it is in that budget season where we will have a very narrow window to do the important work of fixing the issues in the crime lab, fixing the DCI agents that Josh Call has let leave the agency, put new prosecutors back in, fully fund our law enforcement, make sure that our law enforcement is the best trained, best equipped, best paid in the entire Midwest. But we will immediately begin seeing Joe Biden, once he loses the Congress, govern like Barack Obama with a pen and a phone. We better have an attorney general who right then will step in and start getting into those fights with the Obama administration on everything from federalism to separation of powers, to administrative overreach. We will see rule after rule that will impact small businesses, and you can already see them gearing up with Waters of the U.S. and other rules that they're trying to bring back. And we better have an attorney general who's willing to take the flack from the media, who's willing to get into those fights, because those are generational, transformational fights that we have to win. And we have a narrow window to do it with the current court that we have. God bless Justice Clarence Thomas, but unfortunately, he won't live forever, and we have to take advantage of this 6-3 court that we have right now to make case law that will be in effect so it can protect our kids and our grandkids from federal government overreach and abuse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes our debate tonight. We want to thank the Federalist Society again for hosting, thank each of you for coming, and thanks especially to each of our candidates for putting themselves out there and sharing their thoughts tonight. So let's give them all a round of applause.